Let me see here. Pull this up. We are in week 4. There we go. I had to look at it to remember. James chapter 1 this morning. James chapter 1. We are in week 4 of our series, anger, or emojis, but we're talking about anger this morning. We've got just a few weeks left. We've talked about fear. We've talked about loneliness, sadness, and then now anger. And then next week we'll talk about joy, and then lastly love. But coming from James chapter 1 this morning, we're going to talk about this thought of anger. And even a little bit about bitterness and the role that it plays in our lives. And if you found the scripture this morning, James chapter 1, verse 19 is where we'll begin. The Bible says, "Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God." Let's talk about this thought of anger this morning. The word wrath there in James chapter 1 is the same word for anger. The Greek word that's used there is used also for anger many times, and in most of your modern translations the word anger is used there in James chapter 1. But I asked this question this morning: how many of us have been angry before? No, not all of us. If you grew up with brothers like I did, or even if you grew up with sisters like I did, you no doubt know what anger is. It is a very raw and powerful emotion that we all deal with that usually brings out the not so flattering side of us. It usually brings out the unpleasantness in us. It brings about the, can I even say this far, the evil within us. And I want to see 3 things this morning that anger does to us in our lives, and how we can defeat it and why we should avoid it. And 3 things this morning, very simply, and I will be through the message. But number 1 this morning, I want us to focus on the fact that anger destroys. Mark Twain said this one time. He said, "Anger is an acid that can do more harm to the vessel in which it is stored than to anything on which it is poured." It is, he is basically telling us that anger affects us a whole lot more than the person that we are angry at. It is true. It is a self-evident truth in life that anger destroys everything around it. It destroys relationships. I look in Genesis chapter 4, and we'll not go and read there this morning, but I'll just sum up the story for you. It's the story of Cain and Abel. And no doubt many of you are familiar with that story. They were called upon to give a sacrifice for their sins, and they were given very specific instructions as to what they could and could not sacrifice. They had to sacrifice an animal, a lamb that was spotless. And we know that Abel does so, but Cain doesn't. Cain works in the field. He's a farmer. He grows plants and crops, and he tries to take his harvest and sacrifice it, and God does not accept it. And because of this, Cain grows very angry at God and at his brother because his brother's sacrifice was accepted. And what does Cain ultimately do in Genesis chapter 4? He kills his brother. His brother that he loves and that he grew up with, that he had a great relationship with at no doubt one time, that his anger caused his relationship to be destroyed. I believe this morning that anger destroys a lot of relationships in our lives. I've seen people that were great friends, but their relationship was destroyed because of anger over a situation that happened. Sometimes, can I say this? All too many times I see that somebody gets angry at somebody and the one person doesn't even know that they're angry. I get angry at so-and-so, and I am just it boiled up and consumed by it and thinking about it and how they did me wrong and how horrible they are. And I become so angry that I say, I'm never going to talk to them again. I'm never going to do anything with them again. And they don't even know that I'm angry, and they don't even know why I no longer am friends with them. Anger destroys relationships. I've seen anger destroy marriages. I've seen anger destroy families. I've seen anger destroy relationship with God. It is a dangerous thing because, listen this morning, anger within our life, there is no place for anger in the Christian life this morning. There is no justification for anger. But when it comes into our life, it seeks to destroy everything and every person around us. But not only does it destroy relationships, it destroys opportunities. I can tell you, I've worked in a lot of different fields, but I remember I worked in sales for a little while, and it was a little while because I wasn't that good at it. Talked about this morning in Sunday school, the man was going to get fired, and so he went out and immediately began to try to get stuff. I remember them telling me, if you don't make a sale today, you're going to get fired. And I would go out and practically cry and beg people to buy stuff off me. And can I tell you, it works. Nobody wants to see a grown man cry. But it destroys opportunities. I've seen people that were pretty good salesmen, but passed over for manager positions because they had an anger issue. I've seen people who had opportunities to be leaders in some type of capacity because of their anger were not used or chosen. I've seen people with opportunities to do something great, but their anger got the best of them and destroyed them. Can I say this morning? I believe our anger destroys most of our opportunities to witness to somebody. Let me clarify something this morning that is a huge misconception within a lot of churches today. Nowhere in Scripture are we called to be angry at people in the world. Nowhere. We are never called to be angry, to be upset, to be hateful, to be despising of people in our communities and in this world. But far too many times we justify our anger against sin and use it as anger against people. Our anger against things that go on in this world. And listen this morning, I am angry about things that happen. I'm angry about abortion and the terrible situation that we have come to in America, about just how divisive the issue is, first of all, that you can't even talk about the subject without people getting angry and fighting. But the fact of the matter is, there's things that I disagree with in this country. But mark it down, I do not ever have anger or hatred towards the people in those situations. Can I tell you one of the biggest reasons this morning that the pro-choice movement doesn't want to listen to our argument is because we have somewhere misunderstood that we can be angry about abortion, but we can't be angry at the women who've had abortions. We cannot be angry at people who have found themselves in sin and need God. We must come with love and grace if we are going to reach them. And that's just one issue this morning, but I could talk about hundreds of issues this morning. Can I say we could get angry about all kinds of things? We can get angry about drugs, and I have seen the devastation that drugs has upon a person and upon a community. But can I say this morning that if we go over the line of anger towards a issue and anger towards a people, we destroy our opportunity to reach them. It destroys. Anger destroys a lot of things. It destroys, but most importantly, relationships and opportunities. But Number two this morning, I'll move on for sake of time. Anger distracts. A continuation of the thought of destroying the opportunities that God has placed in our life. Anger distracts us from the responsibilities of serving Christ. I mentioned earlier that I said there is no place for anger in the life of a Christian because God calls us to be the light and the joy of the world. And it's very hard to be a joyful person when we are filled with anger. Anger causes us to think about evil things. It causes us to think about hurtful things and not heavenly things. I can tell you this morning, I've been very angry at my brothers a few times. I didn't think about how good I wanted to be to them when I was angry. I can tell you what I thought about doing when I was angry with them. I wanted to take them out back when Mom and Dad went to town. And, well, I'll leave it at that. Anger distracts us from the love that we have for people. We're blinded by things. I think about this. We have a love for people and we love our family, but there are times we get angry with them and it seems like we forget about the love that we have for them. I've seen people say things to friends and to family members that they would never say in any other situation, and they probably don't really mean it, but they say it because they're upset with them. Anger distracts us. It distracts us from our love. It distracts us from our responsibilities. God calls us to win the world, not win an argument. And can I say I'm the guiltiest of this one because I love to argue with people about things. But God calls us to win people to Christ, not win an argument. God calls us to win people to Christ, not judge them. Listen this morning. I saw a post this morning. Pastor friend of mine shared this. He said, Christians far too many times want to be judge, jury, and executor. He said, when God really called us just to be witnesses. Think about that. We want to be judge, jury, executioner. We want to come in and tell them that they're lost and they're sinners. We want to tell them that they're going to hell because they're sinners. And we want to tell them that because they are sinners and because they're going to hell, that they are wicked and undesirable. When the truth is, God just tells us to go, hey, yeah, you are lost, but listen, there's hope. Hey, if they reject that hope, then God will be the judge, jury, and executioner because He is righteous and because He is holy and because He can be those things you and I can't be. Anger distracts, but not only that this morning, number 3, anger devastates. I know that this kind of goes along with the first point where it destroys, but I talked about, in number 1, when anger destroys, I talked about the things that it destroys around us. But can I say number 3, anger devastates? I want it to be very individual at this point because I believe that anger devastates the individual more than anything else. Anger devastates the individual. And listen to me this morning. Let me say this, that the two subjects go hand in hand. And I really struggled with whether or not to make it 2 sermons, but I kind of am combining it. But let me say this. Anger, when left undealt with, always turns into bitterness. Anger, when left undealt with, always turns into bitterness. And along the lines of Mark Twain's quote, there's a quote that I've heard many times that says that bitterness is like drinking poison and hoping the person next to you dies. It hurts the person that has it a lot more than the person it's directed towards. Anger devastates. Can I say this morning that anger, when left unchecked, turns into bitterness, and bitterness will turn you into a cold, dead Christian. Bitterness will cause you to become distant in your relationships. Relationships that you have not yet destroyed will become distant. Opportunities you have not yet squandered will become far and few between. We can become so bitter that we can even fail to see the opportunities that are in front of us because we're so focused on what happened behind us. Anger devastates the individual. Listen, one of my things that my dad told me as I was growing up, he told me that it takes a lifetime to build a reputation and but a moment to destroy it. One moment of anger, one moment of fury and wrath can destroy your testimony with Christ. Nobody wants to listen to the angry guy talk about God. No one wants to listen to the angry guy tell them about how they can get over their anger. But how can we overcome our anger? Well, simply this morning, I would give you the one-word answer, and that's Jesus. But how, through Jesus, do we overcome it? How can we avoid the devastating effects of anger within our life? Because listen, you and I this morning can be angry at people, and it happens. But can I say that if we don't deal with it, it will ultimately destroy us and everything around us. We've got to look for the joy in Jesus Christ. We're going to talk about that subject next week, but let me say this morning, that Jesus Christ came to give us peace and hope and love and all those things, but can I say he also came to bring us joy. I think about that David describes his salvation as a joyful event, and that even after he had forgotten and wandered away from God, he describes it in Psalms 51. He says, "Restore unto me, O God, the joy of my salvation." David is reminded of the joy that God brought to his life when he followed and walked with him. And I find no greater joy than when I am walking with Christ. John, I believe it says that I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth, that they walk with Christ. Can I tell you this morning that your anger will destroy your family unless you give your anger to God and allow him to give you joy. If you want to be an example to your children on how to serve God, you have got to first give up the things that will pull you away from God. We've got to look for Jesus for our joy. We have got to be willing to say that I will not let anger affect my decisions. Listen, it's easy. It's a natural reaction. But Satan would love nothing more than to allow anger to come up in your life and to use it to affect everyone else around you. Satan would love for you to become angry at your spouse, to become angry at your child, to become angry at your friends, to become angry at people within the church, and use that to cause a split and division amongst us. Can I tell you that most time when churches split, it stems from the fact that somebody got angry and upset about something and they didn't know how to deal with it. And then it spreads to everybody around them. Because anger, it turns into bitterness, and bitterness, what is the fruits of bitterness? Usually gossip. Usually blasphemy. Usually it turns into hatred. Anger is a very real thing. And can I say this morning, it's Jesus Christ says a lot about it, and I don't have time to go into all of it. One of the most verses in my memory is my mom would make us quote it all the time. It says, if you say that you hate your brother, you've committed murder in your heart. And every time she heard one of us say that we hate each other, one of me and my brothers growing up, she'd always quote that verse to us. God has a lot to say about anger and hatred. And can I say this morning that somebody in here this morning perhaps is dealing with great amounts of anger in their life. Can I be the first to admit to you this morning that I have a problem? I get angry sometimes. I get upset about things. And I allow that emotion to sometimes get the best of me. But I know, and I hope that you know, that today we can make a commitment to say that when things in our life begin to cause us to get upset, we can say, God, help me to overcome this anger. God, give me joy. God, help me see the joy in this situation. God, help me to see how I can overcome it. Because we have a lot at stake this morning. We have our relationships, we have our opportunities, and we have our calling and responsibilities. All of which can be destroyed by allowing anger to get the best of us. This morning, would you make a commitment and say, God, help me to find the joy in every situation in life and not allow Satan and my flesh to use anger to pull me away from you. Sister Janet, would you come, Aaron? We're going to sing a song. Anger destroys, anger distracts, and anger devastates.